What are the oldest poems that were written in the history of the world? We're going to talk about this for the next couple of videos. And as we do so, I want to put out a caveat. I'm not a historian. I have graduate degrees in poetry and in theology, but history is not my specialty. I haven't gone to the sites that these ancient poems were first written. I haven't flipped through the papyrus manuscripts. I'm depending on the scholarship of others to tell you about these ancient manuscripts. And mostly, I'm also depending on people who know these ancient languages, their translations. So I want to contextualize what I'm going to talk about because I don't want to claim to have more expertise than I do. I don't have expertise in ancient manuscripts, but I do, as you can tell if you watch my videos, have a keen interest in helping us get to know poetry and seeing it as an important part of both human culture and history, and something that can be an important part of our own lives. So, let's think about how literature is often taught. If you study ancient literature, maybe you took a course in high school or college, and you studied ancient Greek literature, often ancient Greek literature is presented as sort of the oldest poetry that we have. Homer, his Iliad and Odyssey, these ancient epics. Greek tragedies of people like Aeschylus, who wrote Prometheus Bound, or Sophocles, who wrote Oedipus Rex. We often think about these as the oldest manuscripts, the oldest literature that we have. And we go to these to find our source, our grounding, especially if we focus on the study of European literature. Now, Greek literature is important. I teach it. I enjoy it. But it would be a mistake to think that Greek antiquity holds the oldest poetry that we have. In fact, the oldest Greek poetry we have would be Homer, maybe Hesiod, people argue about this, and that's probably somewhere in the 700s BC. But we have poetry that was written 1,000 years and more before Homer, that we still have access to the manuscripts and we can still study. So I want to talk to you for the next couple of videos about the poetry before Homer, the poetry before the ancient Greeks. Who are the poets that are writing at what feels like really the dawn of written history? And what can we learn from them? What are their concerns? If we talk about the oldest poetry, we're not going to be hanging out in Greece, and we're certainly not going to be hanging out in Western Europe or America. To talk about the oldest poetry, we need to look at civilizations that rose, developed, became complex, and totally fell, sometimes totally before Greece emerged as a producer of artifacts. So I want to focus in the next couple of videos on a couple literary traditions that we get our oldest poetry from. These are the Egyptian tradition, the Indian tradition, the Chinese tradition, and the Babylonian tradition. We also will probably talk about some related Near Eastern traditions, including the Hebrew tradition. When we talk about ancient poetry, we need to remember that these are poems that are sometimes difficult to access for most people. You can't just go down to the local library and pull off a collection of ancient Egyptian poetry written in ancient Egyptian. So we're very much dependent upon those scholars who have access to these manuscripts. Some of these manuscripts, are 4,000 years old. And so it's very difficult to even look at them, let alone touch them, or they'll fall apart. So we're indebted to these scholars who work on these. And it's worth looking into the scholarly methods. Why is someone who's translating, say, ancient Chinese poetry, why are they making the translation choices that they are? Someday I'll make a video on translation choices. But I wanted to say, as we get started, that there's a couple layers in between we as 21st century readers and the original writers of these poems. Often the original writers of the oldest poems that we have access to, we don't know their names. But we do still, and I think this is almost magical, we do still sense in the oldest literature a very human presence, very human concerns, and sometimes mindsets and ideas that we think, oh man, I struggled with that yesterday. And that's one of the things I love about poetry, that it can connect us to people who lived thousands of years before us, can call us to those things that are still so central to human concerns. C.S. Lewis, the 20th century literary critic, talked about how we sometimes struggle with what he calls chronological snobbery. We feel like today, in our modern world with computers and high-speed internet and modern transportation, that we just know so much now. We now know so much that the past didn't know. The past seems it's another country. It's a country of ignorance and superstition. If only people were enlightened like we are. And we kind of feel bad when we look at the texts of the past. Oh, they were so superstitious. Lewis thinks this is a mistake. And I think that if we look at the oldest poetry, we'll see that these humans are not ignorant, superstitious, know-nothings, like we often, I think, want to think about them. They're humans. They see things that maybe we don't see. They celebrate heroes that maybe we've never heard of. They strive for virtues that might seem strange or foreign to us. And we can learn, I think, more about what it means to be human from reading them. So come on this journey with me in the next couple lectures on talking about the oldest poetry.